All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome. It is July 8th, 2021, and today is a special day. I've been working towards this for a while now, so for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, we kicked off Project Dramond on March 1st, and we had done a little bit of preliminary kind of idea stuff in February, but we didn't actually start any of the work till March. And since then, there have been three things that have been going on. There have been the tabletop source book with the associated first campaign module, the point and click adventure game being worked on by my brother, and wife's doing all this concept art, and getting all of the tabletop source book and campaign module and maps done. Finally got that kind of wrapped up to where it needs to be for the first draft of things a couple weeks ago, and I was able to turn around and start working on the actual chapter work for the first novel in the series. And if you remember going back, for those of you who've been around for a while, I always said that the primary source of inspiration for this was the Dragonlance Chronicles. Also, Forgotten Realms, but this is a lot different than what I did with Saga with Lucemia because that was written uh, third person limited. This is third person omniscient, and it's the first time that I've done a book of this style before. But it's been a lot of fun so far. I'm already deep into chapter 3, going to be wrapping that up later this week, and we have now published chapter 1 of book 1 on Patreon for everybody to go sink their teeth into and get a taste of a few of the heroes. You're meeting 4 of the main heroes in this first chapter. There are more. We still have the leader of the group. We still have another individual we're going to be meeting later on. Those are going to be the 6 primary characters in the good guy camp, and then we have met one of the bad guys, and we will be meeting. I hate to say bad, just the opposite side of things. We will then be meeting additional antagonists along the way. So it's a good introduction. First chapter is now up on Patreon, and as a special treat, I decided I am going to do a read through for this video. Instead of just doing an overview and then linking everybody to the post, I'm actually going to do a read through of the whole chapter. Obviously, you can still check the link below, go over to Patreon, and read the first chapter in its entirety. It is available publicly to everyone. It is not locked behind a subscription. This first chapter I wanted to get out there as a demo for everyone. Of course, subsequent chapters are going to be behind the $3 a month paywall. That's the base supporter package, which gets you access to Discord, as well as just supporting what I do here on YouTube and what Chris and I and my brother do on our various other social medias related to Project Dramond and everything else, the Low Troll Cooking in Real Life series. And of course, you get access to the book chapters as they are produced, and we will be pushing out multiple chapters per month. So hopefully you enjoy and pick up a subscription to support what we're doing with Project Dramond because it's all coming together now. We got the playtesting kicking off for the campaign module on August 4th. So this story here, the first few chapters of the book take place at the same time as the events that are taking place in the first campaign module where players are dealing with what's going on in the city of Parthana. So this first chapter is in the city of Parthana, taking place at the same time in the same place as that first campaign module, and the events of the subsequent campaign modules will be going alongside the events of the book. So if you're a lore person who likes to get information on all the different things that are going on, you'll want to read the books while you're playing the tabletop and simultaneously because it's all ties together. So without further ado, let's dive in to Chapter 1, Book 1 of Project Dramond. The breeze blowing in from the bay was barely enough to cool the sweat beading on Gerald Brendan's forehead. He sighed for the 10th time as he wiped it from his forehead with a dampened sleeve and cursed these hot spring mornings and ridiculous church requirements on paperwork. Look, I already told you you're missing the proper stamp. He pointed with a calloused finger at the section of the document in question. He pushed it back across the top of the wooden desk, the once rough boards as smooth as polished glass from years of repeated use, and went back to scanning the documents from the Serpent's Tooth, which had just docked this morning and was currently unloading her wares. Every ship docking in Parthana needs an origin stamp. Yours is missing. A moment of silence, followed by the figure in front of his desk lightly clearing her throat. Gerald sighed for the 15th time this morning and leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking slightly beneath his movement. She was a pretty enough thing for a sea elf, her auburn locks pulled back in a loose tail and her green eyes watching him closely, but looks didn't matter to him. He wasn't about to risk getting fined by the church for failing to adhere to their requirements. Not again, in any case. He wasn't a young buck to be swayed by a sweet smile. An exception, perhaps? The heavy clink of gold coins in the leather pouch she tossed on his desk was unmistakable. He narrowed his eyes and leaned forward, his gnarled hand pulling the pouch closer to him as he gauged its weight. That smile of hers was tilted to the right, a slight scar on her cheek pulling it in that direction. He weighed the purse in his hand for a few breaths, then took a long, casual look behind her towards the small sloop she was referring to. Well, what no one saw wasn't anyone's business. Where are you coming from? He deposited the purse into a drawer on the right side of his desk, then opened another drawer on the same side that housed the secret compartment for his origin stamps, of which he was officially only supposed to have one for Parthana herself, but an industrious man such as himself would be remiss if he didn't have an assorted collection for times such as these. Forkland. He snorted as he jerked his head in the direction of her sloop where it was docked. The worn and battered sea elf vessel had seen better days from the look of things. In that? He frowned as he peered into the drawer. Not likely, he muttered to himself. Where was that damned stamp? Not that it mattered. He simply needed to know the point of origin to stamp the document. He grunted slightly as he found the one he was looking for. It gets me where I'm going. The smile was gone now, her eyes narrowed and calculating as she watched the stocky little man behind the desk. He had taken her gold, but his questions were starting to get annoying. She didn't want to have to knife someone so early after arrival. Highland wouldn't speak to her for a month if she did. Fair enough, he replied, stamping the origin section into the parchment, frowning slightly at the final results. The lettering was smudged more than he liked, but it was legible. Cargo? None of your business. She caressed the edge of her belt knife with her right hand and leaned forward slightly. Or am I mistaken? Gerald had worked as a dockmaster for going on 20 years now, and he could count on one hand the number of times he'd felt a chill run up his spine. The way her nostrils flared as she leaned over his desk sent shivers through him. That, and the pointed ears which reminded him of where she came from, and what she could do to him if she chose. Elves and their magics being what they were. I'll just mark it down as a wheat shipment. That's common this time of year from the farms near Forkland. He swallowed against the dryness in his throat as his quill scratched the parchment, and he pushed it back across his desk. There, everything looks in order to me. Farron smiled a genuine smile as she snatched the document from the man's hand. Of course, thank you so much for your time. She turned and left his office, glad to be out of the stifling heat of the dockmaster's office and into the relative coolness of the morning docks of Parthana. At least by elven standards. She breathed a sigh of relief at having avoided any bloodshed. It was way too early in the day for it. Any problems? Highland unfolded his lithe form from where he had been leaning up against the edge of the building in the shade, smoking his pipe in silence and keeping a wary eye out for any suspicious noises from inside the dockmaster's office. He rolled his left shoulder to ease the dull throb from too much time in one place. His life partner had taken longer than expected. He'd begun to suspect the worst. Fearin brushed her lips slightly against her partner's cheek. Nothing I couldn't handle. He smelled of pipe smoke and worry. She tucked a strand of his sandy hair behind his left ear, the one that was missing the tip from that knife fight so many years ago. You're cute when you worry. The half-elf rolled his eyes as he tapped the bowl of his pipe out on the heel of his boot. I'm cuter when I don't have to. He tucked the pipe away in his belt pouch and stretched his arms. It felt good to be off the ship after a week on the inner sea. She couldn't disagree. Everything going to plan? He gestured towards the Serpent's Tooth, their home for the past few years. To the casual observer, she wasn't a looker, the curved wooden lines dinged and scratched and worn with use, a permanent air of age hanging about her. But to the sea-inclined, they would see a spotless deck, sails without a snag to them, ropes oiled and coiled and ready to be cast off at a moment's notice. A vessel that might bear the outward look of a simple merchant ship with an owner who didn't care about her upkeep, but at her heart was a veteran of the inner sea with a few scars to show her worth. Several dwarves were finishing up the unloading of crates and boxes and barrels onto several wagons located at the edge of the dock. Thanon's team seems to have everything in hand. He paused for a moment and nodded in the direction of a large group of armored soldiers bearing the mark of the church, that half-risen golden sun with its rays of light splayed out across their shields, breastplates, and cloaks. There were at least 2 dozen of them on foot, listening to another armored figure on a horse barking some type of orders at them, indecipherable from this distance. I don't know that I like the look of that, though. She nodded. Well, let's not keep our old dwarf waiting. Best be gone before those zealots decide they want to check our souls for blemishes. After you, milady. Hyland gave a half bow and flourished. He caught her masked chuckle as she took the lead. It was good that he could still make her laugh after all these years. Thanon Rockguard took a long drink of the cool ale and savored the nuttiness of the brew as it coursed over his tongue and wet his parched throat. He heaved a sigh of contentment as he smoothed his heavy mustaches, now peppered with gray in his middle ears, though he tried not to pay much attention to the fact that his once jet-black beard was now showing signs of age, though it still hung thick and braided in 3 braids down to his belly. He still felt young enough, was just as spry as he'd ever been on most mornings, and he could still swing axe or hammer with as much strength as in his youth, though he hadn't needed to wield the former in the past 5 years since settling down in Parthana for his retirement. He took another swallow and leaned back in his wooden chair, the coolness of the shade from the oak tree that rose above him and his forge, a pleasant place to pass the morning hours. His eyes drifted shut, and he hummed deep in his chest an old dwarven tune his grandmother had taught him long in the days of his youth. It wasn't the Nilrenhain Mountains, but that was fine by him. His hill dwarf brethren were a bit too stoic for his tastes, and he liked being here in the city in the midst of what his cousins called the chaos of humans. There were days when he missed the gentle breeze coming down from the mountains, heavy with the scent of pine and snow-capped peaks, but they were few and far between. He was as content as a dwarf could be, with a supply of the finest ore, a forge, and a home he could call his own, and no more need for bloodshed. Those days were long behind him. Something brushed against the tip of his nose, and he snorted, his eyes cracking open slightly. It was too early in the spring for flies to be buzzing about, wasn't it? He blinked and opened his eyes wider, trying to find the culprit. Nothing. Perhaps just a bit of dust on the morning breeze. He took another long swallow and closed his eyes again, the old song of his grandmother thrumming to his lips again. A moment later, and whatever it was brushed against his lips, interrupting his reverie. He jolted upright, sputtering and spitting. He heard it then. The buzzing, unmistakable, had to be a fly. But what had drawn it here? He kept his forge in a pristine state, not a speck of dust or grime anywhere. There were no chickens or goats to draw them in, at least not on his parcel of land. His neighbor Kryn, 2 doors down, kept a few small animals. Something nipped at his right ear, and he quickly slapped his hand to his head, his ear ringing from the force. He peered at his palm. No bloodstain. He hadn't gotten it. He grunted angrily and drained his mug, then stood. It was time to get serious. He heard it then, a soft giggling coming from the eaves of the forge just above his chair. A growl started to form in his chest, but he kept himself from looking up. He took 2 steps and picked up the broom he used to sweep the floor on a daily basis, pretended to keep himself busy looking for the fly, and eased his way back towards his chair. "Where are you at?" he muttered, his eyes darting this way and that, as if he were still looking for the buzzing distraction. And then he swung the broom upwards towards the edge of the roof, hitting something that had been hanging there, invisible, knocking it back up over the edge. He heard the faint thud of a small body hitting the roof tiles. He grinned. The giggling instantly cut off, replaced by the wheezing gasps of someone trying to catch their breath. "Damn you, Thanon!" a voice called out, and then she came fluttering into view, those gray-purple wings of hers beating away as she hovered over his chair. Althea's brunette hair was in disarray from where his broom had caught her unawares, and the way her fists were balled up against her hips caused him to guffaw. "It's not funny," she retorted. He laughed even harder, leaning on the broom hard enough that it started to bend beneath his weight. He caught himself just in time and slapped a hand against his thigh. "That'll teach you to sneak up on napping dwarves." She huffed her disbelief and tidied her hair before floating down to sit on the arm of his chair. "It used to be easier to trick you." Her frown quickly changed and she bounced slightly as she sat, clearly excited about something. "Guess who's in town?" Thanon leaned his broom up against one of the wooden pillars that supported the roof above his open forge and shook his head, feigning ignorance. "I've received no letters." The brownie squinted up at him with her piercing blue eyes. "I know that's not true." Her eyes opened wide then, and she covered her mouth with her hands. That is to say, what do you mean you haven't received any letters?" "Rummaging around my mail again, were you?" Thanon gave her a mock glare out of his right eye. It was hard to be mad at her, given her nature. Brownies were naturally curious, and didn't have the same view of personal boundaries as most of the other races. To some, they were an annoyance, but he had known Althea since she was a podling, a sister of sorts under the tutelage of their foster mother, the High Elf Lyanna, who was running late now that he thought about it. But yes, Farron and Hylan are here now, if that's who you're referring to. My men are at the docks, helping them unload. She frowned, momentarily upset. She had wanted to surprise him. But just as quickly she pursed her lips and tilted her head. He wouldn't know this secret. I bet you don't know about the quarantines. It was Thanon's turn to frown, his dwarven features creasing. What now? Her lips curled upwards into a smug smile. See, she was smarter than the old dwarf. She spent a moment reveling in the sensation before the words came bubbling out. The church soldiers, paladins and templars and the like, they've started setting up quarantine roadblocks out of the docks. Theron felt his eyebrows creeping up his forehead of their own accord. What? He didn't want any trouble with the clergy, and his men were bringing back several wagon loads of goods from Fearon's ship. Goods that he didn't exactly want inspected by any representatives of the Church of the Elder Ways, or he'd be paying his weight in import taxes. When did this happen? Althea scrunched her nose up as she thought. This morning, I think. I was keeping an eye on the docks to make sure Fearon and Hylan arrived safely. Thanon's heart began to race. This is the last thing he needed. He scrambled for his jacket, his nap long forgotten. Oh, come on, I need to know where my wagons are. Relax. Althea stood up in the arms of his napping chair and yawned. They all got out before the blockade was in place. That's what I was coming to tell you. Her voice took on a smug tone again. No news is faster than Althea's news. She fluttered her wings for effect. He took a deep breath as he stood there, jacket half pulled over one arm, and resisted the urge to strangle her. Lyanna would shave his beard. So that's chapter one, an introduction to several of the main characters in this first novel, which, again, does not have a name yet. We have not given Project Dramond a name, nor have we given the book a name, nor have we given the first campaign module a game. We haven't given the adventure game, the point and click adventure game, a title yet. But this is the first chapter in the book for those of you who have been waiting for this to be released, and hopefully you enjoy. Don't forget, if you want to read it instead of listening to it, you can check the link below to go over to the Patreon page and sink your teeth in. And hopefully you enjoy it enough to pick up a subscription and follow along with what we've got coming in the pipeline, because we got another chapter coming next week. We've got the first tabletop module being playtested in August and a whole lot more. So, thanks everybody. See you next time.